Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. That's the problem, because they are not on a par, because all of them are based on the 5 means of knowledge. None of them are an independent means of knowledge. Purva Mimamsa comes the closest, but they are stuck in the first portion of the Veda. That's the problem. And Nayayikas and Vaisheshikas, Sankhya, Sankhya, there are 2 kinds. One is Veda Bhakya, they don't accept Ishvara. Yeah, Nirishvara Sankhya. Amazing. What are they talking about? I don't know.
It's in Wikipedia too, the whole...
Everywhere. Wikipedia and, anybody who is, anybody who writes your cold. Yeah. Anybody. So anybody who writes about Hinduism, all of us have to take care. Those who are vocal about Hinduism and Hindu philosophy, all this, we have to present this properly. Because it's a very subtle difference, people don't understand this. That because there is a very compelling argument, because you see all 6 together, and it is some kind of a tradition where it has always been seen together, and not by the ancients, it's a modern phenomenon, and so therefore we also go along with it, but we have to see the subtle reason why not to do that. And why not to do that is because none of those systems of philosophy, the so-called systems of philosophy, none of them is an independent means of knowledge. It's very simple. They rely on the 5 means of knowledge that is available to the person, and the consequences of that I will discuss in session 2, coming up shortly as soon as our friends here join us.
Could we go through them, Swamiji, to understand what they are?
Say that again?
Could we go through them to understand what they are?
At some point.
At some point?
Yeah. It's not going to happen right now.
No.
But at some point, yes. At some point you can go through that. Pujya Swamiji would say, don't go through that until you have firmly established in this, because otherwise it becomes a red herring. Oh, you're coming closer to me. I like that. Yeah, wonderful. I like that. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane. Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane. Savilasa Mahamoha Graha Grasaika Karmane. Savilasa Mahamoha Graha Grasaika Karmane. Avichara Krito Bandhaha Avichara Krito Bandhaha Vicharena Nivartate Vicharena Nivartate. Tasmad Jiva Paratmanau Tasmad Jiva Paratmanau Sarvadaiva Vicharayet Sarvadaiva Vicharayet. So the difference between these so-called systems of philosophy and Vedanta is that those systems of philosophy rely on these 5 means of knowledge to share their wares. Yeah, that's what it is. It's all about trying to objectify that which cannot be objectified. It's all about trying to infer. And so this Vedanta is not a philosophy, it is you. It is the meaning of the word Tvam, which is Aham, really. It is you. It's not a system of philosophy because it is a new means of knowledge that is not accessible to me directly. Directly means I am not in charge of it, which is a very important distinction. If I am not in charge of it, who is in charge of it? It's a means of knowledge that comes from outside. This is something we have to really understand. Shabda Pramana, the means of knowledge called Shabda, is not handled by you. It cannot be handled by you because it immediately goes to the realm of other knowledges, other means of knowledge. And the problem with those systems of philosophy is that it does not interrogate the status of the knower. It does not dismiss, falsify the knower as, it does not dismantle the knower. They don't dismantle the knower. What does Vedanta do? It dismantles the knower. It knocks off the knower. That's how we can claim oneness. Otherwise, if I know Vedanta as an object or the object of Vedanta, which is the subject, if I know that as an object, then that knower-known distinction is in the place. That Triputi, Jnanam, Jneyam, Jnata, all of them are in place. Knower, known means of knowledge. It is there. I, a separate entity, and I am operating a means of knowledge in order to know an object, like even flower. Yeah, they were expecting the yellow one. This one came. That was last time. So, like even flower. So, flower exists, and then I am capturing this flower with what? With at least 3 senses. With the eyes, I am seeing the flower, the eyes as it were, the cognition goes through the eyes, the apertures envelop and embrace the flower and then take back information, and the knowledge happens, this is flower. And then I can use that sense of touch, because they can make flowers look exactly like the real thing. And sometimes the smell also is misleading because they can spray some essence and this one naturally doesn't have a fragrance, but sometimes they can spray. But the touch is the telling thing. This is the touch of Ishvara really. They can, no matter how many materials you have, you cannot make it the same. The petals look different and feel different. So with the sense of touch, with the sense of smell, with a sense of sight, I can simultaneously deploy and say this is flower. So the cognition of flower has taken place, and I am who in relation to the flower? The knower. And what is this? Known. And what is that? The eye is coming out, means of knowledge. So knower, known, means of knowledge, they are all intact. So the knower does not become the known, neither does the known become the knower. After delineating this is flower, I don't say floweroham. I am flower. Or tattvamasi, aham flower asmi, aham brahmasmi, aham flower asmi. Nobody says that. Why? Because the knower is intact. The subject-object difference is kept in place by these means of knowledges that I have at my disposal, which are always distancing and which are always reproducing the duality. But what does Shabda Pramana do? The first thing it says to the knower, get off this throne. Get off. We don't want you here. But I am all in all. I have objectified everything. Let me try. I'm going to objectify the self. That's why I don't like Vedanta. I don't like you. The knower says to Vedanta, I don't like you. That's why I'm going to become a Nayayika. Because there I can derive everything happily and logically till the end of my days. The knower never needs to be knocked off. That's what I said. This is a totalizing body of knowledge, because it is transforming me. It's not something, just something to think about and say, oh, that's nice, that sounds nice. You are the whole. Thank you. It's a wonderful compliment. That's not what this is about, This is not a compliment. This is the truth of you. It's not a flattery. It's not a compliment. It's not trying to make one look good. This is who you are, and it has to be understood. And in order to understand that, there has to be a dismantling, and we've been talking about this at length in the, which one? Amrita Bindu Upanishad. There has to be a systematic dismantling of all kinds of notions in the mind, in the head, in the buddhi, including the notion that I am all in all, and I am the master, and I am the jnata, the knower, that has everything in my fingertips, at the tips of my fingers. I objectify this, I categorize that, I name this, I own this, I conquer this, and I'm okay. Yeah, who are you? I'm still miserable. But perhaps if I name a few more things, perhaps if I hoard a few more things, perhaps if I have and hold a few more things, I will become eternal. I will become infinite. Infinite is not becoming, okay? Pun intended. Infinity is you. No, well, I think I need to do a few more things. That is the cost of leaving the knower in place. When you leave the knower reigning as the Raja, it's a miserable Raja. It's a sad Raja. That's what it is. Very sad, because the knower is reigning, and the knower is an insufficient, considers oneself insufficient, incomplete. And that's why he keeps on wanting to know more and more, thinking that I will, buttress, I will finite, if I have enough finite things, I will produce infinity. Wrong. So the knower is first plucked, Yeah, with Vedanta tweezers, the knower is plucked out, shaken off, and put to one side. And the knower does not go easily. Kicking, screaming, crying, holding on to the throne. Oh, but that is nothing. At least I have nothing. Don't take away nothing from me. What is it to you if I have nothing? So the Shabda Pramana, that's how it operates. You can't, you can't mess with it. That is what it is. It doesn't look pretty. It's not like, oh, I think I'm ready for Vedanta and I'm just going to listen to the dull set tones of the teaching, and then at Akhandakara Vritti, that Vritti of oneness is going to envelop me, and also let's bring all the others in the classroom as well, and also all the others in the classroom, and together we cast off the shackles of duality and enter the kingdom of oneness. I don't know how I said that with a straight face. This is all again spiritual romanticism part 2. Yeah, that's what it is. We have to get off this hobby horse immediately. This is just all nonsense, just between you and me. No nonsense. Crazy. So I have to submit to the pramana, just like I submit to my eyes, just like I submit to the ears. In fact, I am backing up my eyes. I argue with you, no, this is correct because I saw it with my own eyes. I defend the means of knowledge that are accessible to me. I defend them. I back them up. Similarly, I have to see Vedanta as a means of knowledge that I defend, that I learn to defend. There's only one slight difference between the 5 means of knowledge and Shabda Pramana, Vedanta as a means of knowledge. What is the difference? The first 5, Aham, I operate. The 6th one, Shabda Pramana, operates upon me. Ayyo, that's where the fear comes. That's what is frightening. And that's why, people are afraid of Vedanta. It's much easier to go to so many options and think of so many options. Go to gurus who don't speak, go to gurus who speak different things, go to have a lot of options at one hand. Because there I am not the topic actually. Even though they say it's all about me, it's all about things that I can objectify and feel safe. Blue light, an object, not the subject. Watch the blue light. And then the whole classroom of people meditating says, oh, blue light, blue light. You're the only one that is not seeing blue light. In fact, you don't see the light at all. But then if 100 other people sitting in the room are saying blue light and are doing blue light japa, pun intended, then what will you do? You will say, yeah, I also saw it. Pressure, peer pressure. You have to appear in a certain way. That's why it's called peer pressure. Yeah, that's what it is. Blue light, yellow light, and this, kundalini, linguini, all kinds of things. This is all just posturing. And so that seems much more easy to do. Breathe in moksha, breathe out bandha, easy. Seems easy because I'm dealing with objects. Breathing is object, it's an object. That's what in meditation we see, that I'm objectifying the body, I'm objectifying the mind, I'm objectifying the breathing. That's why in America the most famous kind of meditation is sitting and watching the mind. Keep on watching. What are you doing now? Watching the mind. What did you do yesterday? Watching the mind. Again it's objectifying. The subject is not displaced. Vedanta displaces the subject because the subject is subject to sorrow and abject fear. That's what it is. And the subject is subject to sorrow because the subject refuses to remove itself from this subject-object limitations. And therefore it has to be forcibly overhauled, taken out of the picture, and then brought back in slowly in a servile capacity, like an usher. I told you that. This is something that has to be understood. While all the 5 means of knowledge in my hands, I operate the 6th means of knowledge called the words of Vedanta. And I will add, handled properly by a guru who has been taught how to handle it by their guru. That operates upon me. I don't operate this, it operates upon me. It's just like undergoing a surgery. I told you this when we did the Amrita Bindu Upanishad. It's a small Upanishad, therefore minor surgery. Out of office procedure, quick, laser surgery. But in surgery, the first thing, even though you have met the surgeon and you have decided the date of the surgery, and the surgeon will draw some things and say, this is what I'm going to cut out, and I may even take out your appendix for free. We'll talk about that later. But then I'll cut out this, I'll stitch like this, and then you will have this much of a scar. All this is talked about in the office, correct? In the doctor's office, you have talked about all this and you feel good, you feel okay. And then the day of the operation, there is a surprise. You meet someone you have never met before. Who are you? I am your friendly anesthesiologist. Oh, but I was never told about you. What? Well, we'll talk about all that. What is your weight? That's the only time the person does not lie about the weight. Because the anesthesia is given, in proportion to the weight. So if you say 10 pounds less, then you're going to wake up in the middle of the surgery asking fundamental questions. Who am I? What for I'm here? Ayyo, this samsara, so much pain. So you will not lie about your weight. This is the only time perhaps the person tells the truth, no matter what. Down to the ounces, not just the pounds. Yeah, kilograms, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, not a single point. You know, because each point, every point has a point here. Yeah. And so, now we come back to the story of the self-appointed anesthesiologist. So, what is your weight? How do you feel today? Until I met you, I was okay. I'm your anesthesiologist. Well, what are your qualifications? Where did you graduate from? There's no time to ask all that because you're being wheeled into the operation theatre. Wait a minute, you're only 5 foot 2 inches. What can you do? Can't ask all that. Where is your credentials? Have people who have been anesthetized by you, have they come back? What is your success rate? You've lost it. You're in that, deer in the, car lights mode. Deer in the lights. You are just frozen. And then you just look helplessly because you're already on a gurney. You're not in a position of power, yeah. You're wearing a hospital gown and you're on a gurney. And you've already got some IVs going. It's not a position of power. And then what? And then, finally you say, okay, all right. And the person doesn't stop talking. The anesthesiologist is a very chatty anesthesiologist. And then the anesthesiologist takes out a pen and paper. Please sign on the dotted line. Wait a minute, what does it say? Well, it says, you don't want to read all of it. No, but I do. No. I'll just tell you what it says. It says that usually people come back. But in case you are allergic to the anesthesia and in case something happens and you don't come back, your relatives, because of course I'm not afraid of you any longer, but your relatives, or in case something happens, you're maimed or you go into permanently vegetative state, your relatives do not sue me or the hospital. Malpractice, waiver. You don't feel like waving, you don't feel like doing anything. Somehow with great Shraddha, that is when you understand the meaning of Shraddha, is when you're about to go into surgery, signing off on the anesthesiologist, really the meaning of Shraddha, and you sign off, and then what? I'll just count backwards. This is what it is. Because the doctor who is operating upon you, this is the doctor's assistant, not an assistant but a helper. The anesthesiologist who is belonging to that hospital has been called by the surgeon to clear the way for this surgery to take place. The doctor doesn't want your input during the operation. I think that's too large a scalpel. What size is that? I think you should use one smaller. Are you cutting in the right place? It appears lower than where the tumor is. Oh, is that my heart? I think it's making a horrible noise. Look into it. The doctor doesn't want you to interfere because the doctor knows exactly what she or he is doing and the doctor wants to do their job without your input. Thank you very much. That's what it is. And that, that anesthesia means knocking you out in order to excise the tumor. Here Vedanta knocks you out in order to excise the tumorous growth of wrong ideas, ideologies, notions about the Jagat, about yourself, the Jiva, and about Bhagavan, Ishvara. It excises all the things that don't belong. And you have to submit to the operation like a kitten. You have to just submit to the operation without lot of queries. Without, that is what is called surrender, that is what is called Shraddha, the attitude of reverential receptivity, because I cannot handle the pramana is handled here by the doctor. And who is the doctor in the Darshtanta? The doctor here is the teacher who handles the pramana. And in fact, this overlay of doctor and teacher was not lost to the ancients. The Guru Stotram, the second verse, talks about this very eloquently. Ajnana timirandhasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshurun militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Unto that Guru, my namaskara, unto my salutations and surrender to that teacher who is actually a surgeon with the scalpel of knowledge, has scaled back the cataracts of wrong vision and ignorance. Because when you have cataracts, you see things wrongly, misperception. And so who has scaled back the ignorance and completely removed the cataract through the scalpel of knowledge, unto that Guru who has opened my eyes to the truth of myself, Namaha, Namaskara. And so therefore, the Shabda Pramana does not walk and talk on its own. It needs a megaphone. It needs a speaker. And that has to be in the form of a live teaching. That's what works. It has to be live, it has to be understood. There is a connection, there is a relationship, there is a transformation. This is not rocket science, this is exactly how it proceeds. Because what I have to see, I have to submit to, because this means of knowledge I don't handle. But why not? Why can't I handle? Because it's too hot to handle. That's why. That's why it's like a live piece of coal. Holding it, I start juggling. I can't handle it, literally. Why? Because you encounter the words of the Shastra, you are the whole. That's what, I can't handle it. I can't see it because my vision is occluded by my own resistances, by my own notions, by my own fears, by my own conclusions, wrong conclusions. So the wrong conclusions are removed through the handling of the pramana by the teacher who has submitted to that same operation, to his teacher, to her teacher, to his teacher, going all the way back to Lord Shiva. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. I salute the entire lineage that starts where the knowledge has come from the Lord, and for which the Adi Shankara is a wonderful link, who has helped us to see how to see this. So that is why the Guru comes into the picture. So the Guru has to be dragged in, because I cannot handle the pramana. I need help. And this is where I don't understand. Because in all other areas, the word Guru is used very loosely. There is dance Guru, music Guru, cooking Guru, stock market Guru, and one life Guru. There is one life Guru, life coach. And this life coach, you have to pay them a retainer. I met one, and I asked, how does this work? You have to pay them something every month. Celebrities, these people who don't know what to do with their life, they hire these people. And you can call them any number of times a day. Some hours are there, between 10 and 6, no calls, but the rest of the time they are available for you. You pay them some money every month. And then you say, I'm having a meltdown, I'm having a wardrobe malfunction, I'm having a bad hair day, whatever it is. And the life coach takes you through all the steps and then says, you are the best, east or west, come on, you can do this, yes, you can do that. Yes, you have to stand up for your spouse. You have to stand up, for yourself. You have to show your spouse who is boss. All these things fills you with all kind of, what's its name? Enthusiasm. That's what there is. Life guru also. And then, then 6 months later I met this life guru. I said, how is business? Not good at all. I said, what happened? I'm not doing it as much. I said, why not? I'm having marital problems. Life coach was having marital problems. And it is not even certified in most states. Because, if to be a therapist, you need to have undergone certain hours of therapy. In order to give a massage, you should have, passed through licensing and board exams. But to be life coach, you can just put a shingle and start business. No credentials required. At least not yet. I think maybe later they may come up with something. We don't know. But when it comes to Vedanta, people are afraid of the word guru. You feel like there is some allergy. Cooking guru, no problem. Dance guru, cha-cha-cha, no problem. Everything, no problem. Mahavakya Upadesha Karta. In fact, the word guru has to be used for Mahavakya Upadesha Karta, the one who teaches the Mahavakya, one who unfolds the vision that you and Ishvara are one. That is the definition of the word guru. But people are very, very allergic. The word guru brings out hives. You feel like just going far away. Very unfortunate, because it's a misunderstanding. And then what doesn't help are certain vernacular idioms. Don't stand behind the donkey. The reasons are obvious. Why? It will kick you. It may kick you. Don't stand in front of the guru. Don't get too close and stand in front of the guru, because the guru will also kick you. Crazy. These are all the collective fears of transformation, really. And then the fear of having a teacher or approaching and needing help is an authority issue. That's really what it is. Because, everybody, whoever has grown up with mother, father, caretaker, doesn't matter, has authority issues. Because mother is fallible, father was fallible, they did their best. But the best is never good enough, is it? No. From the standpoint of the child, the best is never good enough. And so therefore, there are severe, unacknowledged, uninquired authority issues that need to be reckoned with. So the authority issues make one afraid of having a guru. People would rather be drawn to dead gurus rather than an alive one. And this is something which we have to see, because they feel unsafe. And that unsafety is a projection of the unconscious from the past on to the present situation. That is what is called adhyasa. It's a projection. It's a transference of my pains and fears onto an authority figure, which the guru becomes. And so, usually I always say this, two people go to the guru. The child goes to be parented, the inner child, and the adult goes for knowledge. And the guru has to do simultaneously, put a pacifier, keep the child quiet, and teach the adult. Or better still, the guru teaches the adult how to take care of that inner child. That is Vedanta. So you see, all kinds of integrations are happening in place between the split between the inner child and the adult, the unconscious and the conscious mind. The split between my own issues and fear of authority figures, my own rebellion against myself. All those inner splits are healed. What to talk of outer splits? It's not about splits at all. It's a non-dual vision of oneness. And that is why the guru is an invariable part of the knowledge of Vedanta. This is what the problem is. No, but it is so scary to have a guru. That fear has to be reckoned with. That is why Shraddha. Shraddhavan labhate jnanam. This is what Bhagavad Gita promises. That if there is Shraddha, means if all these issues are resolved and I am in the place of being able to learn, a receptive place, minus the projections and the transference, then that such a person will definitely gain the knowledge. So the projections and transference comes. It's okay. And it's okay. I just, don't buy into that. I am, with regard to the projections and the transference, I am in a place of neutral witnessing. I have to put myself in a place of neutral witnessing so that I can watch it and not get affected by it. Usually what happens, with the guru, first there are two kinds of general transferences that I'd like to talk about. In addition, there are specific transferences specific to each person. There are two kinds of general transferences. The first one is called Shobhana Adhyasa. What is Shobhana Adhyasa? Seeing all and everything as wonderful. Everything about the guru is wonderful. Why? Because I was searching for this knowledge. Nobody is there. Oh, this person is wonderful, savior, fantastic. Oh, look how cute they are. Look how they eat. Look how they sleep. Everything about them I love. Shobhana Adhyasa, a positive transference. And very quickly it is replaced by what? Ashobhana Adhyasa, a negative transference. All that the guru has to do is look or not look at the person. Oh, they didn't look at me. You are a horrible guru. I don't like you at all. Let's look up other gurus because this one is not going to work for me. And so this is Ashobhana Adhyasa. So the positive transference, it doesn't take time and it turns into negative transference. Or sometimes it yo-yos between positive, negative, positive, negative. This is the general kinds of transferences, and then there are specific transferences, each one particular to one's own psychological background and life history. All this has to be resolved because Vedanta is a package deal. It has to come with the guru because the Shabda Pramana is a Shabda Pramana not when it is read, when it is delivered, when it is talked about. Because you see, the process of cognition is not like this flower. When I know this flower, when I say I am the knower of this object called flower, what is happening here? It is a two-part operation. One part is, I've already talked about this, I'm just going to, clarify this further. One part is where the eyes, in this case, the means of knowledge, as it is the knowledge, the desire to know, and that cognition goes out with the help of this eye and checks out the flower and brings the knowledge back to the mind. This is called vritti vyapti. So the flower thought takes place in the mind when the flower is sighted. Vritti vyapti. And then there is a recognition. That's why it's called recognition. There is a recognition, this is flower, this is the technical name for this is phala vyapti, vritti vyapti, and then phala vyapti. This is a flower, flower cognition takes place. First there is a flower thought, and then that flower thought is the information that the mind needs to come to the conclusion, this is flower. Now replace flower with eye. Then it is no longer a two-part operation. So here also vritti vyapti is there. And what is the vritti? What is the thought here or the mental formation? The pramana handled by the teacher gives rise to akhandakara vritti, the vritti of oneness. The vritti that is oneness. In other words, the teaching. So the teaching of oneness comes also in the form of a thought. And then what does this akhandakara vritti do? It goes in, it self-destructs, because vritti by itself is kshanika. But what does it do? This akhandakara vritti is like a flower that goes into the heart, and then what does it do? It breaks open the concrete walls that are stopping me from having darshan of Bhagavan as the truth of myself. That's all it is. So from the mouth of the teacher to the heart of the student, the vritti goes like even a flower, soft, gentle, compassionate, pleasing, and then the phalavyapti need not be there, because this is not an object. This is self-evident, so I don't need to say, oh, this is me, oh, interesting. No, that is, I is already understood. Self-evident, I exist, I am, I know. So what is being dismissed is all the wrong notions of what I am. So what I am not goes away with the flower, that flower goes away with the vritti, which is, which breaks down the walls of what I think I am, revealing what I truly am. So therefore the knowledge of the self-knowledge is not like the knowledge of the flower. It is not a two-part operation. This is flower, and how do I know? Because I have checked this flower out with the help of the flower thought and flower cognition and flower recognition. Here there is neither cognition nor recognition, there is only an understanding. And how does this understanding take place? The understanding takes place through dismissing what is not I, and the I naturally shines. This is something to be understood. If you haven't understood, doesn't matter. It will be repeated again in other contexts. That's why we are having a multi-pronged approach of many texts simultaneously being unfolded, so that any truti or a lapse or a gap in one area is made up in the other. So that is basically how the means of knowledge operates. So the guru allergy has to be, what should I say, overcome. Because whether you like it or not, that is how the knowledge takes place. And that's why, going back to the Viveka Chudamani, which I quoted, how to do the vichara, ato vicharah kartavyah, jignasuhu vicharah kartavyah, atmavastunah vicharah kartavyah, how samasadya, having approached gurum bhaktya, having approached the guru with bhakti, with reverence, with devotion. How to do the devotion is also given. Prahva prashraya sevanaihi. It's the same thing that I quoted earlier, verse 36 of the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. What is that? Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. Please know this truth of yourself. How? Through, bending. The bending is good, good for health. What does the bending do? The bending helps, the midriff, and then it tones up the midriff, midriff, and then the bending also, is an actualization of how one feels. It's an enactment of how one feels, because in assimilating this knowledge, which is very sacred, and it is difficult to know, in fact it is impossible to know without the teacher, in assimilating this knowledge I have to undergo a transformation. It's going to transform me completely. It's like getting a new birth. And so therefore I am willing to have that humility that it takes, because in other words, I'm giving permission to the guru to knock off the knower. That is what it is, to knock off the knower, because in no body of knowledge the knower is knocked off. That is why Vedanta is not one among many. That is something which has to be properly understood. So I'm giving the guru the permission to knock off the knower. So pranipata, prahva, prahvi bhava, And then, tad pariprashna. Pariprashna means questions are allowed, but then at the proper time, in the proper way. And we learn how to ask questions by observing the kinds of questions Arjuna asks in the Bhagavad Gita. So beautiful. Like in the 3rd chapter, he is feeling confused. And then he says, Vyamishreneva vakyena buddhim mohayasi iva me. Me buddhim, my buddhi is as though you are confusing me. He doesn't accuse the teacher, you are confusing me, as though I feel confused. Very beautiful. And so like this, we learn to engage with respect for the teacher. And because I'm not doing this because the teacher has some issues and needs a lot of respect. No, I'm doing this for me. Because I want this transformation and I want to be transformed. So then finally what is said is seva. So pranipata, pariprashna, and then finally seva. Seva is not to be confused with slava. No. It's not slava. Seva. Seva here means that, that I look for opportunities to serve, to be around the teacher so that I can learn. That's all it is. So in fact the word shushrusha, which is in Hindi and other vernacular languages, defined as seva. Shushrusha is not seva. Shushrusha is shrotum ichha, but it is seen synonymous with seva. Shrotum ichha means desire to hear. But then, I can't just hang around looking useless, so therefore I make myself busy and do something while I'm hanging around. That's all it is. And so through this, then it says in the next line, Upadekshanti te jnanam, jnaninaha tattvadarshinaha. So definitely they will teach you, definitely they will be there for you. The jnani here is the, Shrotriya Tattvadarshinaha Brahmanistha. So these teachers who have studied and who are immersed in this knowledge, who have studied properly from their gurus, they will definitely teach you. So it's not, Vedanta is not a teaching of manipulation. You don't catch hold of the student and say, you have to sit here, you have to do this, and you have to be here, and you have to listen as I say. Did you get up? Why? Sit down. And you're doing that? No, you should not do this. No. It's a teaching entirely without manipulation because the teacher is not interested in having a following. That is why it works. Namaskara works because you see the teacher as an altar of surrender, and the correct altar of surrender is that which does not need that surrender. That's why it works. So it's not a question of manipulating the students and saying you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to go here, you have to go there, you have to bring this, you have to bring that. No such thing. If the teacher requires anything, all that the teacher requires is a willingness to learn and a receptivity. That's all it is. And so therefore it's a teaching without manipulation because there is no need to manipulate. That is what the thing is. And when this is authentically communicated, it's a very beautiful thing. It works. It works. Why? Because I'm here, you are there. It works. It is just wonderful. More we shall see next time, whenever that is. I think Tuesday. Tuesday I think is Amrita Bindu actually. Yeah, maybe in the next weekend. It's there in the calendar. They all know. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. If there are any questions, you can do that. Got the audio working again. Wonderful. Any questions? Yes, you also have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Thank you also. Yes, Yukiko, nice to see you. Very nice. Reza is there, everybody is here. Wonderful. You will miss several classes due to evening work. Yeah, rotation. So I'll watch on the live stream. Okay, no problem. All right.